You're not bad at communication. You're just untrained. And that's the truth nobody tells you. Because if you were really bad at talking, you wouldn't know exactly what to say after the conversation is over. But you do. You always do. Hours later, in the shower, lying in bed, suddenly the perfect words show up. So the problem is not your intelligence, it's your timing. And timing is trainable. Meanwhile, there are people out there who always have something to say. Fast, sharp, confident. And you think, they're just like that. No, they're not like that. They built that. They've already practiced the thoughts you're trying to create on the spot. They don't freeze because they've been there before, mentally. So in this video, I'm going to show you something simple, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. How to train your mind to respond in real time. How to build internal scripts without sounding fake. And how to become the person who never runs out of words when it actually matters. Let me make this easier for you to follow. I didn't build this video randomly. I divided everything into 6 parts. Each part has a specific purpose, and each one builds on the previous one. So don't just listen passively. Pay attention to how each piece connects. Because in the first part, you're going to understand the foundation. In the next ones, you'll start seeing the structure behind communication. Then we move into something more practical. And by the end, you'll have a system you can actually use. So take this seriously, because if you follow each part the right way, you won't just understand communication, you'll start thinking differently in real conversations. All right, let's start with the first part. Part 1, communication is not a gift, it is a discipline. Most people believe that great communicators are born, not made. They look at someone who speaks clearly, confidently, effortlessly, and assume there is something special about them. A natural gift, a talent they never had. But that belief is not only wrong, it is dangerous. Because the moment you believe communication is a gift, you give yourself permission to stay silent. My perspective changed through a simple realization. The people who always have something to say are not improvising. They are rehearsed. What looks like spontaneity is often preparation. And this idea is not new. Philosophically, it aligns with a very old principle. Mastery comes from repetition. The ancient Stoics believed that excellence is not an act, but a habit. You do not rise to the level of your talent. You fall to the level of your training. Communication works the same way. The person who seems sharp in conversation has likely repeated certain ideas dozens, maybe hundreds of times. They have internal scripts, not rigid sentences, but mental frameworks. They know how to start. They know how to respond. They know how to recover. This is what makes them powerful, not talent, structure. Think about it. When someone asks you a question and you freeze, it is not because you lack intelligence. It is because your mind has not been trained to retrieve and organize thoughts under pressure. Communication is not just thinking. It is thinking on demand. And that is a skill, a trainable skill. Your experience already points to something crucial. People who speak well often carry ready-to-use ideas. This is what we could call philosophical preparation, the intentional building of thoughts before the moment you need them. You don't wait for inspiration. You build clarity in advance. This is exactly how philosophers approached dialogue. They didn't rely on improvisation. They reflected deeply, organized their ideas, and carried them with them into conversations. In other words, they prepared to think. So if you want to become unstoppable in communication, the first step is this shift in identity. Stop seeing yourself as someone who doesn't know what to say. Start seeing yourself as someone who simply hasn't trained yet. Because once you train consistently, your mind begins to change. You start noticing patterns in conversations. You start anticipating responses. You start building your own internal library of ideas. And slowly, something powerful happens. You stop reacting, and you start leading. Part 2. The power of mental scripts and philosophical clarity. There is a hidden structure behind every confident communicator. It is not randomness. It is not luck. It is architecture. What you discovered, the idea that people carry scripts, is one of the most important truths about communication. But we need to understand it correctly. A script is not something fake. It is something refined. Think of it like this. When a person repeats certain ideas over time, they begin to compress them. What once required effort becomes automatic. What once felt forced becomes natural. This is how mastery works. And here is where philosophy becomes essential. Because without philosophy, your scripts are empty. You might speak fluently, but without depth. You might respond quickly, but without meaning. Philosophy gives your communication weight. It forces you to ask, what do I actually believe? What do I stand for? What is true, even when it's uncomfortable? When you think deeply about these questions, something interesting happens. Your words gain structure. Instead of reacting emotionally, you begin to respond intentionally. For example, instead of saying whatever comes to mind in a difficult conversation, you draw from principles. Control what you can. Accept what you cannot. Speak with clarity, not to impress, but to express. Listen not to reply, but to understand. These are not just ideas. They become mental anchors. And over time, these anchors turn into scripts, not memorized sentences, but reliable ways of thinking. So when you enter a conversation, you are not empty. You are equipped. This is why some people feel unstoppable when they speak. It is not because they talk more. It is because they hesitate less. They trust their internal system. They know that whatever happens in the conversation, they can navigate it because they have trained their mind beforehand. And this leads to a powerful shift. You stop fearing conversations. You start using them. Every interaction becomes an opportunity, not a threat. You test ideas. You refine your expression. You strengthen your presence. In philosophy, dialogue was never just about talking. It was about discovering truth through interaction. And if you adopt that mindset, communication stops being something you survive. It becomes something you master. Part 3. Becoming unstoppable through practice and awareness. At this point, the path becomes clear. If communication is a skill, if confidence comes from preparation, if clarity comes from philosophy, then becoming unstoppable is not a mystery. It is a process. But here is where most people fail. They understand the idea, but they do not practice. Because practice is uncomfortable. It exposes your gaps. It reveals your hesitation. It forces you to confront silence. But this discomfort is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of growth. Every time you struggle to express an idea, you are identifying a place where your thinking is unclear. And that is valuable, because clarity is built exactly there, in the moments where you realize you don't know how to say what you mean. So instead of avoiding those moments, you use them. You reflect after conversations. What did I want to say? Why couldn't I say it clearly? How would I say it better next time? This is how you build your internal scripts consciously, not by copying others, but by refining your own voice. And over time, something changes. You begin to notice that situations that once made you nervous no longer affect you. You walk into conversations with calm. You respond instead of reacting. You speak with intention. This is what it means to become unstoppable. Not that you always say the perfect thing, but that you are never mentally paralyzed. You always have access to your thoughts. You always have a way forward. And this is the final philosophical insight. Freedom in communication is not the absence of structure. It is the result of structure. The more you train your mind, the more you organize your thoughts, the more you refine your expression, the freer you become. Because you are no longer dependent on the moment. You are prepared for it. So the next time you see someone who speaks effortlessly, do not admire their talent, understand their discipline, and remind yourself, you are not lacking ability. You are simply building it, one conversation at a time. Part 4. Turning knowledge into skill, the internal questionnaire method. At this stage, understanding is not enough. You don't become powerful in communication by consuming ideas. You become powerful by organizing them. So instead of adding more theory, we shift into something more practical, a system, a personal questionnaire that forces your mind to structure, store, and retrieve communication patterns. Because here's the truth. If you don't organize what you learn, you lose it. Clarity must be captured. So let's begin. Question 1. What do I usually struggle to say? Most people never identify their communication gaps. They just feel uncomfortable, but they don't define why. So ask yourself, where do I freeze? Is it when I meet new people? When someone challenges me? When I need to explain something? Answer. Example. I struggle when I need to explain my ideas clearly. I know what I think, but I can't structure it fast enough. Now you have something specific, and specificity creates direction. Question 2. What do I wish I could say in those moments? This is where you begin building your script library. Think back to real situations, moments where you left a conversation thinking, I should have said something better. Now rewrite that moment. Answer. Example. I wish I had said, let me explain this in a simpler way, and then structured my idea step by step. This is powerful, because now you're not just remembering, you're redesigning your behavior. Question 3. What is the simplest way to express this idea? Complex thinking creates hesitation. Simple thinking creates flow. So take any idea and reduce it. Answer. Example. Instead of explaining everything at once, I can break it into 3 points. What it is, why it matters, what to do next. Now you've created a repeatable structure. This becomes a mental shortcut. Question 4. What phrases can I reuse in different situations? This is where communication becomes efficient. You don't need infinite creativity. You need reliable tools. Think of phrases that help you. Gain time structure. Your thoughts. Control the conversation. Answer. Examples. Let me think about that for a second. There are 2 ways to look at this. What I mean is this. Let's simplify it. These are not random phrases. They are control mechanisms. They give you space to think while staying confident. Question 5. How do I store and revisit what I learn? If you don't revisit, you forget. So you need a simple system, not complicated, consistent. Answer. Practical method. Keep a note on your phone called communication system. After important conversations, write what worked, what didn't, what you would say next time. This turns experience into improvement. Without this step, experience is wasted. Part 5. Repetition, refinement, and real growth. Now we go deeper, because knowing what to do is still not enough. You need repetition, but not random repetition, deliberate repetition. Question 6. Am I practicing consciously or just talking randomly? Most people talk all day, but never improve because they are not aware. Answer: reflection. I speak a lot, but I don't analyze how I speak. I don't review my conversations. This is the gap. Awareness turns action into progress. Question 7. How can I simulate conversations before they happen? High-level communicators don't wait. They prepare mentally. Before important situations, they rehearse. Answer: method. Imagine a conversation. Ask, what could they say? Prepare 2 to 3 responses. This builds speed because your brain recognizes patterns. Question 8. What feedback am I ignoring? Feedback is everywhere, but most people avoid it because it's uncomfortable. Answer: reflection. When people lose interest, interrupt me, or seem confused, that is feedback. Instead of ignoring it, use it. Adjust your communication based on reactions. Question 9. Am I trying to impress or to be understood? This is a critical shift. Trying to impress creates pressure. Trying to be clear creates connection. Answer: truth. When I try to sound smart, I overcomplicate. When I focus on clarity, people actually listen. Simplicity wins, always. Part 6. Integration. Becoming someone who always has something to say. Now everything comes together. This is no longer about learning communication. It's about becoming someone who naturally communicates well. Final question. What identity am I building? Because in the end, this is not about techniques. It's about who you become. Answer: powerful reframe. I am someone who reflects, organizes, and improves how I speak. This identity changes everything. Because now, you pay attention to conversations. You learn from every interaction. You refine continuously. The final mechanism. Here is the full system in one flow. Experience arrow. You go through a conversation. Reflection arrow. You analyze what happened. Reconstruction arrow. You improve your response. Storage arrow. You write it down. Repetition arrow. You use it again. This is how you build unstoppable communication. Not by talent, not by luck, but by design. Closing. Thought for the video. The difference between someone who struggles to speak and someone who always knows what to say is not intelligence. It is structure. One person lives conversations randomly. The other builds them intentionally. So if you want to become unstoppable, don't wait for the right words to appear. Create them, refine them, store them, and carry them with you into every conversation. Until one day, what once required effort becomes who you are. Now everything connects, because if you followed all the parts, you should realize something by now. Communication was never about knowing more words. It was about having a system behind your thinking. And once you see that, you can't go back to speaking randomly again. But there's one last thing you need to understand, because knowing the system is not enough. You have to live it. Most people will watch this once, feel motivated, and then go back to their old habits. Don't be that person, because this is not information. This is training, and training only works when you repeat it. So here's what I want you to do. Don't just move on from this video. Come back to it, watch it again, but this time, focus on one thing, where you personally freeze in conversations, because that's where your real growth starts. And if something in this video hit you, don't just ignore it. Write it down, comment it, because when you put it into words, you start to take control of it. And I'll keep making more content like this, deeper, sharper, more practical. So if you want to keep improving your communication, don't disappear after this video. Stick around, because this is just the beginning, and the next level builds on what you just learned here.